Okay, so this is the next question we're going to be working on. So let me first erase everything. All right, so when you have a question like this, you should know that this big fraction bar over here means divide by, okay? So just remember you're going this divided by that. So of course, our first thing that we have to do is rewrite the equation. So put everything on top in a parentheses. 1 over 6x plus 3 over 15x squared. And then that is divided by, because that's what this line means, x plus 3 over x squared. Now, if you look at this, we can now tell that we have to go this divided by that, which means we have to use KFC, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put everything in big parentheses and then change the division into multiplication. And now I'm going to flip this, x squared, x plus 3, right? So now we know that we have to fill this big empty parentheses, right? So let's take a look over here. We notice that our denominator looks different, so we have to find our LCM, right? So let's find factors for 6x and factors for 15x squared, right? So 6x happens to be 2 times 3 times x. 15 is 3 times 5. There's no 5 on top, so I have to put it over here, okay? And then x squared means there's 2 x's. So since there's already an x over here, I'm going to put it here. But there's no space for another x, so I'm going to put it in the back. Don't forget, the same numbers and the same letters have to be on top of each other. So what is my LCM? I'm using all of this like this. So don't forget, you're multiplying everything here to find your LCM. So it's going to be 2 times 3 times x times 5 times x. So what is my LCM anyway? 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 5 is 30, so that's 30, and then x times x is x squared. So now we have our LCM, so I'm going to go ahead and put that there. 30x squared, 30x squared, okay? So now let's try and figure out how we went from 6x to 30x squared. 6 times 5 is 30, and then I only have one x here, so I need another x to make x squared. So I'm multiplying the top and the bottom by what? 5x. So I'm going to write the 1, and then I'm going to multiply that by 5x. Because that's what I had to do to the bottom. 6x times 5x is 30x squared. Now let's take a look down here. We already did 15x squared, and then we look down here. 15 times what is 30? 2. We already have x squared, and we have x squared again. So we basically only have to multiply by 2. So we already have 3 on top, and all we're going to do is multiply the 2 on the top. Okay? To make it equivalent fractions. So 1 times 5x is 5x, and then I'm going to combine these together because now we have the same LCM. And 3 times 2 is 6. And I'm going to multiply that by x squared and then x plus 3. Quickly, you can tell that the x squareds are going to cancel out. But then after that, there's nothing else we can do. So what's our answer? Our answer is 5x plus 6 on top, and then 30. You see how 30 is still left here? So it's going to be 30 times x plus 3. Now if I could cancel anything else out, I would, but I can't, okay? So this is your answer. And over here, again, question number 1 and 3, you don't have to tell me what x cannot equal, all right? Only for question number 2, you need to tell me, okay, what cannot equal x, all right? And that was in the previous video. So let's move on to question number 4. I forgot to take a look at the time. All right. Okay. So now is question number 4. Identify the asymptotes, domain, range, and zeros, then graph. So, you know, this was the one with the long answer, but it's not really that long. First, let's start with the asymptotes, okay? Okay. So the asymptotes, we have to start off with the vertical asymptote. But for the vertical asymptote, I said the bottom part has to equal 0 because that's the part that cannot equal 0, right? An asymptote means the graph never ever touches that number on the x line, okay? So let's go ahead and factor this first, right? I have to factor in order to answer all these questions. So remember 2x squared minus 3x, how can we factor this? Yes, we know that we can divide both by x, right? So we're going to pull out the x. And then 2x squared divided by x is 2x. Negative 3x divided by x is negative 3. And then on top, yes, I got to do the big x, right? So let me just do it right here. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. 7 at the bottom. So that would be 8 times negative 1, right? My leading coefficient is 2, so 2 over 8, negative 1 over 8. So this is 1 over 4. Put the x's on top, so I'll have x plus 4. And then, what have I done here? Why did I put negative 1 over 8? I'm sorry. Okay, so let me do this again. So I got 8 and negative 1. I got my 2 fraction bars. My leading coefficient is a 2, so I put 2 on top for both. Then I put 8 and negative 1, which is my 2 answers at the bottom. I simplify over here, put the x's on top, so it's x plus 4, and then 2x minus 1. I'm sorry. I think I'm in a hurry. This is my prep period, and second period is almost ready to come. Anyway, so the vertical asymptote is what the bottom cannot equal. So x cannot equal 0 and 2x minus 3 cannot equal 0, right? So vertical asymptote is that x equals 0 and x equals 3 over 2. If you don't understand that part, it's because 2x minus 3 has to equal 0, this one right there. So you add 3 to both sides, so 2x is equal to 3. And now you divide both sides by 2, so x equals 3 over 2. Alright? I hope that explained it. Now let's move on to horizontal asymptote. And that was the song, wasn't it? So let's see. We have the same exponent, top and bottom, so same degree ratio, right? Okay. So ratio meant we're going to look at the leading coefficient 2 and the leading coefficient 2, and we're going to divide it. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, right? So our horizontal asymptote is that y equals 1. All right? So now let's take a look at the domain and range. Oh no, what have I done? Okay. So what you gotta do next is, oh my goodness, my phone's going crazy. Okay. So the domain goes with the vertical asymptote, and you're going to say x is defined as, okay, the domain is basically everything except for what? The vertical asymptote is at 0 and 3 over 2. So basically, x cannot be touching 0 and 3 over 2, right? So everything on the x-line is okay, except for 0 and 3 over 2. And then the horizontal asymptote has to do with your range. Your range is going to be y, and I'm going to define the values of y as all of y values except y cannot equal what? 1, right? And then finally, it says identify the zeros. So let's go ahead and do that. To identify the zeros, I said we have to look at what? The top, okay? So for the zeros, okay, we're going to say x plus 4 equals 0 and 2x minus 1 equals 0. Did that look like an equal sign? Equals 0. So if we subtract 4 from both sides, x equals negative 4. If we add 1 and then divide by 2, we'll get x equals 1 over 2. So the zeros are right here. Okay? So that's it. And then it says then graph, right? So that's the part I'm not even worried about. Go ahead and use Desmos, punch in these numbers, and you'll be able to graph. Okay? I have 2 more questions that I have to go over with you, but I'm going to pause right here, okay?